Yep, okay, great. So this meeting is not being streamed live, but it is being recorded and will be uploaded this afternoon to the YouTube. So, good morning everybody, welcome to the Corporate Services and Economic Scrutiny Overview Committee. It's the 11th of July. Right, so first is the membership, which hasn't changed, so we're happy with that. Yep. The two apologies for absence. No? Received from the floor? No. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 6, are we happy with those? Agreed? Okay. 4, disclosure of members' interests. Oh, sorry, yep, Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, hi, just to inform the meeting that the urgent business, I will have to either remove myself or just not participate because I'm on the board of Advance.
Okay, fair enough. 5, forward plan of cabinet decisions, that's there for to note, just for your information. So, the first main report is the annual workforce report, which is what we get, this committee, which sort of deals with our staffing issues, gives an overview of what's happening. We've got Leanne's here to present it, but does no one from the cabinet want to say anything? No. Okay, let's go straight to Leanne. So if you just give us an overview of the report, then we'll take some questions.
Okie dokie. Obviously, it's quite a large report, and it's the first time I've been here. So if there's anything that you want to do differently after this one, please just let me know. So it's really just a statement of where we're at and where we're trying to get to from a people perspective, and to give you some assurance on the measures that we're taking. So in terms of, you can see there's a clear link to the corporate plan in everything that we do, which we think is really important. And obviously workforce is paramount to the success of the council. All of our workforce information and a task that we undertake is monitored via our workforce committee for assurance as well. So in terms of the current landscape, obviously we're moving to a business as usual following the pandemic. And how we do that and work smart is there's lots of support still in place, and we're doing work smart reviews for all of our staff when they're coming back into the buildings, whether they're County Hall or anywhere else. And so that's really looking after their welfare and how they may choose to get the best out of them in a work sense and their productivity against how the current working arrangements are. We had a very short-term strategy that went to last April. That was successfully completed, and there were very short-term actions really relating to the pandemic. And we've now moved into a 4-year strategy, which is aligned to the administration cycle. So we're looking to the future to see how we can build and take things forward. So in terms of the data, I've just pointed out that it should say 22 on there, not 21, so apologies for that. I'll get an updated one with the correct date in. But we have got significantly more staff than we did last year due to the 620 plus staff that we TUPE'd from the NHS. So I won't go through too much of that detail, but the labour turnover has also come down, probably because we had a severance scheme in the previous year. Since last August at a time, I think I've taken a very different approach to our workforce committee. So it's very much focused on exceptions reporting and having a more collaboration with heads of service around how we can solve people-related organisational issues, and that seems to be working really well, and you'll see that when we come on to some of the data later on. So we're actually just working collectively to solve some of those problems, and the strategy actions and was signed off by the workforce committee, and we keep them up to date because there's a huge, you've got it appended there, but there's a huge operational action plan that sits underneath of each of those streams with work stream leads. So in terms of the pandemic strategy, we had 6 headlines. They were engagement, experience, health and wellbeing, managing self and others, developing self and others, equality, diversity, inclusion, recruitment, reward and recognition. And as I said, that was completely signed off. All actions were complete. And then we've moved into a 5-pillar strategy, which is an enriched experience, health, wellbeing and self-care. So more focused on individuals taking a bit of responsibility as well as the organisation, planning our people for the future, equality, diversity and inclusion for everyone, and systems, innovation and automation. So anything that we can automate to make things easier, that we ought to be doing. So we also have the values embedded in those across all of the actions, and we now also have Work Smart and climate change as supporting pillars to the strategy. So everything that we do should actually be thinking about climate change and working in a different way following the pandemic. I think we've got a one-page summary of that as well, which we use very, we attach it to quite a lot of things, so it keeps it alive and we can see, keeps a real focus on it. I won't go through all of the different ones because there's obviously an awful lot of information in there, but we've broken it down in the document to explain why it's important, what we've already achieved in that area, what is the innovative thinking across the field, so we're always looking at the horizon to see how we can do things differently and keep up to date, and what we're trying to achieve and what actually that might look like, and then we've focused it down into some real key objectives at the end of each one. So each one of those has got a work stream lead, as I said, that's got all of those covered off, and the action plan, they're responsible for their action plan, which is reported through Workforce Committee. Just scroll past all of those. So if we think about the HR function, its structure, we've been a really flexible service throughout the pandemic. We've kind of flexed up, flexed down. We've had a number of people move into secondments in other areas, supporting wherever we possibly could. Just because it's one of those things that we're an agile team, we always have been, and we want to make sure that we're supporting the organisation as much as we possibly can. We've been really successful in awards in the last couple of years. Previous to that, probably wouldn't have been as successful as we have been, but the focus on our strategies and our risk assessments have really held us out in national stage. So we've won a couple. Really proud of the fact that we won the Best Health and Wellbeing Initiative for the PPMA in the pandemic year. So if you're going to win an award, that's really the one you want to win in a pandemic. So really proud of that one. And if we move on to the key performance metrics, as I said, we've done things differently from workforce point of view. And that seems to have paid real dividends, because I think it's the first in a couple of years where we've managed to achieve our targets. So appraisal wise, we're just short of 87% compliance, and we didn't meet it, I think it was last year and the year before, so that's a real positive improvement. We'll never get 100% because you have a number of people who are off sick and things like that, maternity leave, so that's why there's that variation, and you've got the breakdown there. We also have 11 statutory mandatory core learning requirements. And as you can see, we were compliant across the board. Next year, well, this current year, we've now got 12 because we've included climate change in there as well. So we'll be, we've got a bit of work to get people through that one because it's brand new. Just because we were compliant across the board doesn't mean that we don't do additional things. So after the year end, I've spent some time with some of the service leads where they haven't quite met target, just to understand, not to really kind of, get a telling off or anything like that. It's more to do with, well, there's something not quite right in this area. What can we do to support that and do things differently? And we've got some really good actions actually that are going to be put in place to support those that didn't quite meet it. In terms of personal professional development, obviously I mentioned we've successfully tupied 623 staff, I think it was, over from the trust. There was an awful lot of prep and development that went into that, and we did lots of inductions and things like that to get the managers in sort of an overview of how things at NCC work, and that really went down very well. In terms of apprenticeships, we've now got 600 apprenticeship standards from level 1 to level 7. We've had a further 2 cohorts that we've gone out to recruit to. The pandemic hasn't been kind in terms of our numbers of apprenticeships. So we've got a bit of ground to make up and get a few more through the door. So we went out for 60 in the last round and we managed to get 29. So we want to get a lot more apprentices through the door. So we've also we heavily support Apprenticeship Week, and we do get a lot of interest. So hopefully we will see an uptake in the numbers going forward. We now have 2 national graduates that come through the national programme, and they've sat in the HR team, the policy team. We're now going through the recruitment process for those again this year. Internally, we have an MBA programme, which is run on an apprenticeship basis. We've had 13 people complete that so far, and they've had really great success. You know, they've got distinctions and merits across the board, so they've worked really hard, and we have a further 11 of those going through the programme as we speak. And we've had a further 9 employees go through the level 6 chartered management. So we're doing quite a lot to support staff in terms of their personal development. If we go into case management, I won't go through the numbers. They are reasonably low given the pandemic. So we did see a slight drop off in the number of cases, which is really good, that we were dealing with throughout the pandemic. That has seen a slight uptake since all of the restrictions have been lifted, but they still remain quite low. You've got the breakdown there of sickness meetings that we take, and we take a 4-stage approach to managing absence on long and short term basis. So we try really hard to support staff through their well-being. In terms of when things don't go so well, we have a really robust mediation programme. We've got about 20 internal fully trained mentors, mediators, and the referral process for that is very well embedded, so we work well with that. Key projects, as I mentioned a number of times, it's kind of etched on my brain now, is the 2P of the 620 staff. It's a once in a career thing to do, to 2P that many staff and make sure that they land really, really successfully, and that is what happened. They're very happy working for the council. There was lots of effort put into making sure we had safe day one arrangements, and actually the approach that was taken, it was very much about putting the person at the heart of the process, so that they felt very welcome and that we wanted to have them as colleagues, and the feedback that we've had from them has been absolutely great. Not a single complaint that I'm aware of. They were very nervous about terms and conditions coming from the NHS to the council, so we did a whole scale job evaluation process, so that if they wanted to change their terms and conditions to the councils, depending on their personal circumstances, they could make an informed choice. And I think we've had about a third of them move over to the council terms and conditions following that exercise. They got personal welcome letters. We had a dedicated inbox. We had lots of tailored drop-in sessions. They had a welcome pack. So we really did everything that we could to make them feel very welcome, and that has been really appreciated. We also did, for the whole of the staff cohort, so all 5,000 staff got a COVID pack, a work smart pack that was supporting agile working, and it was the HROD team that coordinated the delivery of those. So they had 57 separate collection points, and there was between 12 and 1,700 individual collections at each of those sites. And they were done over a very short period, over 2 weeks. So they did a great job in getting those out. And those, again, in the midst of the pandemic, were very well received by our staff. So we also have realised that we're working in a very challenging labour market at the minute. It's not quite like we've ever seen before. So we've very recently set up a very focused task and finish group to promote to put us in a position where, against the market conditions, where we've got hard to fill vacancies, that we're really doing absolutely everything that we can to address that. So it's built on four columns of promotion of NCC as an employer, process improvements, sustainable careers, pay terms and conditions. So that's well underway now, and we've got some very targeted actions, and we should see some quick wins coming. There's lots of it that will take a bit longer, but there's some very clear identified quick wins that we will be able to put into place to support managers where they've got hard to fill vacancies. And again, it's a great collaborative approach across the organisation. Some of the workstream leads are actually service leads, not just all sitting within the HR OD team. If I move on to sickness, sickness is obviously a really important part of what we do. For every 1%, it's about £1 million that we can save. So we have a real focused, targeted approach on sickness. It was very low throughout the pandemic, which is a real testament to the way that we managed our staff throughout that period. Obviously, with the lifting of restrictions and people mixing a lot more, sickness was inevitable that it would go up, and it has. But we do, as the figures earlier in the report would show you, there's a lot of work that goes on to manage that, and I'm happy to take any questions on that at the end. There's a breakdown for all of the areas. Adults and housing tend to be our outliers, and I think there's a lot of that is about the demographics of the staff within those areas and the ageing working population in those particular teams. So we're working on some of that talent management stuff, moving into that space as well to support the areas. Okay. And as I mentioned within the strategy, health, wellbeing and self-care is one of our 5 pillars. We have Kelly Handyside, who's our health and wellbeing coordinator, and I think from an elected member point of view, she's been doing some work with yourselves as well. And we've widened the offer to have a psychological wellbeing coordinator, which we think is going to be really important, given that mental health tends to be the top absence reason across any department. So we've got a triage approach for our psychological wellbeing coordinator, to try and upstream that work rather than someone being in crisis before they get some support. And that seems to be working really well. It's quite early days, but hopefully next year when I come back, we'll be able to do some more detailed analysis on the impact that that's made. We've got some benchmarking further down in the report, and you know, obviously we do work really hard, but actually you can see that we're very favourable against our national and regional counterparts, which is really positive. Some of what we've done in terms of why we've avoided kind of going through major areas of sickness in such a difficult period was we did a personalised risk assessment exercise for every single member of staff, and that began in June 2020, and we've done a couple of updates to that, and most recently moved that into the Work Smart review, which is very much focused on, have you got all the kit you need? You know, what do you look like when you're not so great? What would you like us to do in those circumstances? And as you can see there, we've done some pulse surveys as well, which have, you can see from January 21 to 22, pretty much all of the indicators have indicated that there's have improved to January 22. So whatever all of the inputs that we've done have really, the staff have really appreciated those, and have the outputs of the survey have kind of shown that. Some of the stuff that I think that really helps is the fact that we've got a HROD helpline. That's when we get to periods where we know that we've got high capacity, we put that onto a rota. Throughout the waves of the pandemic, if you like, we also had a COVID-19 hotline, which was staffed by the HR team, and that very much focused on outbreaks and managing that and coordinating that. And again, the fact that we didn't have any particular team go offline, I think demonstrates that worked really, really well. And you can see there we've got a breakdown of how that service was used, and it's no great surprise that adult services was one of the highest users, because they're a frontline service. And you can see that in January of this year, aligning with the peak in the pandemic, we had the highest number of calls to the line at that period of time as well. So if we move on to some of the other things that we're looking at is agency staffing. Obviously that is a significant cost. So we've been working with the innovation and improvement team to get under the skin of that a little bit. And we're in the process of working through how we can address some of the hotspot areas and have a clear action plan about how we're going to work with that. We have an internal staff bank so that we have internal staff and an external staff signed up so that we can draw down on them when we've got tight areas, but there are some areas that we haven't been able to cover, so that we do have to still revert to agency staff to make sure that the services are running safely. But we're on with those actions to try and limit that spend as much as we possibly can. Fixed term contracts, we constantly are reviewing those to make sure that they're up to date and that they're all necessary, to be fair. Equality and diversity, our networks have been a real success. We brought another 2 online in the last year, which were armed forces and apprenticeships. The apprenticeship one has been really, really well attended, and that's all of our levels of apprenticeship. So we've got some of our MBA staff that sit in that space to try and mentor people to come and want to take up an apprenticeship. And they've been really heavily involved in some of the work that we've done. So the work smart stuff, the networks, and have been very heavily involved to make sure that we're taking account of all staff needs. In terms of gender pay gap, we have one of the lowest gender pay gaps of any local authority, which is, again, really positive, and we're quite proud of that. In terms of surveys, I've mentioned that we've done pulse surveys. We are moving to an 18-month cycle of surveying, so an overall 18-month survey, and then pulse ones taking a particular theme in between. And as I talked about with Workforce Committee, that was what the heads of service felt gave them the best data to be able to work out at key points whether the overall action plan that they have is working, and we take a temperature check. And we've done the pulse surveys for COVID, but this is kind of moving it on to the next phase of what it should look and feel like. Living Leader is a programme that we have brought on, which is a personal leadership development programme. We have taken an in-house train the trainer approach to that, which is obviously the most cost-effective route of doing that. So we've now got 6 people who are fully trained to deliver that in-house, and we have about 500 licences. It's a 3-day programme that's really very intense, but very impactful. It's very practical, and it widens leadership capacity. And we've had all of the trainers go through their pilots at this point, and the feedback from the pilots has been absolutely amazing. People saying that they've done, masters in leadership, but this is by far more useful and practical in the workplace. So that's kind of paired up with the strategics work plan that Jan's overseeing, and to kind of buoy up the leadership capacity to be able to deliver on some of those key priorities going forwards. Whistleblowing is the next sort of point in the report. We reviewed the policy in April 22, and it's now called Raising Concerns at Work. And the sort of main change to that is the division between staff concerns and member concerns. So staff concerns comes via this process, and member concerns go via the monitoring officer. We do still have the Safe Call platform, which works really well, but we do receive contacts via anonymous letter, via management routes, and we also do it via exit questionnaires when staff are leaving the organisation. I would say that the numbers are much lower than they have been previously, and you've got some of the breakdowns there, which I think are pretty self-explanatory, but the system itself is, for staffing, works really well. We get an independent investigator within the organisation to look into those, and we generally do some really positive work on the back of any concerns that are raised via that route. So that is pretty much, I know that is a really big report, so apologies for, and thank you very much for listening intently. But yeah, the recommendations are laid out there, and ask you to accept those.
Thank you very much. That was a whistle-stop tour for a very extensive report. Thank you for preparing it and your team. And I think it is worth noting that the success in a very big piece of work with the troopy of the over 600 staff is noted, and you know, that it's not easy in the best of circumstances. So I'm glad that's gone relatively well, and that the new staff are welcomed and enjoying their roles now as employees of the County Council. Right, so do we have any questions on that report? Councillor Murphy?
Thanks, Chair. I actually have more than one question, so you might want to take one and then ask someone else if
Well,
they're...
we'll start with one and...
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch your first name. What's your name? Leanne. Hi, Leanne. On page 17, sort of 16, 17, we're looking at the health and wellbeing strategy, and there's a lot of really good stuff in there, which is excellent to see. However, I've worked for several local authorities in England and in Scotland, and I have to say that the biggest cause of staff sickness, stress, lack of well-being has been workload, and I don't see anything in there about workload management and actually ensuring that people, and I know it will be somewhere in this authority, I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit about that. Thanks.
There are a number of things that we can look at that would give us a real clear indication. One of the ones that we have is our flexi route as well. So if we monitor kind of how much up and down people's hours are, and when we have a particular area where we think there's a bit of concern, we work with the team to work out what's going on there. Occupational health, we always meet with them as well on a monthly basis to get their intelligence, because they generally, if someone is suffering in that direction, they do come in that via that route. In terms of actually what we want to do going forward, we have Chris Thompson is in the process of trying to identify within the diary technical side of it to have, we've promoted via WorkSmart having very clear hours of screen-free time between 9 and 10 and 12 till 1. But we can block that out so that that applies to the whole organisation to make sure that people are moving away from the screen. I think there has been a blur between in the pandemic of work and home, and that's been something that we've really focused on through the promotions that we've done, which probably aren't, it is clear in here, is that there's constant programmes about making sure that people are getting up and getting away and working within their contracted hours and looking after their well-being, micro breaks throughout the course of the day. I think there are always hotspot areas where if you take finance, for example, towards the end of the financial year is a really heavy area. So we ask the managers to take real responsibility for highlighting how that kind of works and making sure that they try and put some actions in place of it. I think if there's, the committee wants to look at that in a bit more detail, we can get some more work from Kelly Handyside to share some more stuff that we've put in place. It's an ongoing battle because we're a local authority and we work with limited resources. We can only do what we've got with the financials that we have, but it's always on our radar.
Thank you. We'll have another one from Councillor Murphy, and then we'll see if anyone else has got it.
Thank you. So on page 21, okay. Equality, diversity and inclusion. I was a bit taken aback to see that we are members of Stonewall and that we're paying a lobbying group to actually advise us. Are we paying a fee to Stonewall for the Workplace Diversity Index?
So that was a historical, so we haven't paid into Stonewall for the last couple of years, so that was our last ranking.
Councillor Oliver had a question?
Thank you. Amazing response from HR and IT to the COVID pandemic in terms of, the sudden enforced massive changes in the way of working. I'm sort of interested in where it goes from here now that COVID hasn't gone away, but now it's much less serious and there have been times over the past couple of years where County Hall has been frankly a sort of ghost town, really. Hardly anybody, everybody had to work from home, and now there are a lot more people here. But what do you see it looking like going forward, and what sort of proportion of staff do you expect to be in the building compared to how it used to be, and how will people blend that, and how will you deal particularly with issues around new starters and training them and people and stopping departments becoming sort of silos because, you know, if people aren't mixing, will they work across departments and so on? So it's going to be challenging. I'm just wondering where that's sort of heading.
Obviously, and in terms of that, it's been very much the discretion of the department how they use that space. So they're given a ratio of 3 to 10 desks, and that's pretty much standard across the organisation. In terms of moving forward, the Work Smart review from an individual basis is very much focused on actually the productivity of the individual, and that balance with the need. It's very clear that the need of the service is absolutely the first criteria, and then if we can marry that with the needs of the individual to make them the most productive that they can possibly be, because if people are happy, they tend to be a lot more productive. So in terms of, I don't think there's one size fits all. We do have a Work Smart forum. So we had Work Smart, which was under a board. Rick O'Farrell was leading on that. That's moved into business as usual. And we're in that phase where people have had a couple of months back in the building. We have a forum where there's a designate for every area comes along, and we're talking about how we're going to move things forward. So in terms of being back, everybody should be back that should be back. If there's issues around how that's playing out for a particular service, that we need to feed that into the process for review, because if there's anything that you feel that isn't working as it should be, we need to deal with it as soon as it arises. But the general idea is that it is as flexible for the needs of the service as we possibly can. If I take HR as an example, it's better that the staff aren't actually here, because it means that they're out with the staff in the depots and things like that. So you can't say that's exactly how it should look and feel in every area, but it is very much for the service director and the heads of service to determine how that should look and feel for them against what the priorities are.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy, another question? No? Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. It's given me, I'm a new councillor, so it's given me a whole raft of information that I wasn't aware of. It's really, really informative, and it's good for me to know what's going on with the staffing on the front line. Question that I've got is, on the performance appraisals, you said, maybe I've misunderstood this, so correct me if I have, that you hit the target for 86.98%. So that left like a 13.02%. These weren't picked up because they were either on sick or maternity leave?
There's always, it will never achieve 100%, because you will have always a number of staff who are on maternity leave and sickness. So that's why the target is set at 85%. So it is a constant discussion that we have at Workforce Committee about making sure that people have an appraisal within the last 12 months.
Okay.
So yeah, there is a proportion that haven't met their target.
Right. So will these people who haven't been picked up at a certain point in time be picked up at other points through the year?
Yes, there should be.
All right.
And what we tend to do, if there's a particular pattern, we address a particular pattern in any one particular area.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're reassured that no one's slipping through the gaps and not ever getting an appraisal. Right. Okay. I had Councillor Dunn next.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got a question about the apprenticeships, really. I mean, I was disappointed here that we only managed to secure 28 in the cohort 5, and there's been a really big effort. I think, you know, we've had face-to-face meetings, we've had TV adverts, we've had this, that and the other. So really my question is, for cohort 6 going forward, what measures do you think would improve that figure? And can those figures, can an ongoing report keep coming back to this committee so that we know that things are improving in that respect?
Yeah, I think apprenticeships are going to be really, really important to us, and not just, I think we often think about entry-level apprenticeships as well, and it's much wider than that. So the apprenticeships are going to have to feature very strongly in our talent management arrangements, in terms of you know, we talk about what used to be career grades and things like that. So if we've got hard to fill areas, we need to be giving a career path into those so that we're growing our own, and that we've been really successful where we've done that. But in terms of actually how we attract, that comes back to some of that task and finish stuff that we're doing with the recruitment and retention and branding, and the employees of the future look very different to the ones that we've had in the past. So we have to get used to the fact that there's, and I mean, it's only a term that I've become very aware of recently, the platform economy. So we've moved from the gig economy to the platform economy. So you'll speak to lots of, you know, teenagers, to be fair, who will have a second income stream via YouTube and things like that. So we have to get into the groove of how do we, they'll not want to work 5 days a week and things like that. So there's a whole host of things that we have to do very differently going forward if we're going to pick up on that and attract the really skilled individuals for the future. So that's all kind of mixed into that talent management, recruitment and selection stuff, but more than happy. And Janine Hinchcliffe, I don't know whether any of you know her, she's now a national chair for apprenticeships as well. So she's just been appointed, so we're really proud that she's actually been chosen to do that.
I come back on that.
Yes.
Sorry. Might that include some sort of review on the wages for apprenticeships as well?
So yes, so that we'll pick up that was brought by trade union colleagues at JCC actually last time, and life has moved on significantly since the last JCC in terms of funding, and I think Jan might have something that she wants to follow up on, and Alison Elston's been to a couple of meetings in the last week or so where we're talking about cost of living and the impact that that might have on our overall salary bill. So there was things that we wanted to kind of put into place, but I think we just need to be very mindful that we can afford it. Yeah.
Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, but before that, I would like to preface it by saying that I think you've done incredibly well. You know, there has been a pandemic on. We're councillors and we see local services being delivered daily, you know, to many people's satisfaction. You never get 100% satisfaction, but you do get the majority. So the questions I ask are really drilling in for possible improvements. One of the improvements would be my understanding. But on page 11, for example, I heard you say, and I've appreciated you saying, how the staff enjoy working here, what's available for them, the training that's put on, etc., etc. And it's a wonderful building to be working in, as is outside. But when I read 1 person in 8 will leave this authority each year, I'm astounded. I'm dumbfounded. I would like to know, is it in one discipline? Is it across the different types of employment? And importantly, how does that equate to private industry? Is it higher? Is it on a par? Do we look at it? Is it unfair to look at it? Chair, that would be one question. I have another one, but I'll leave it at that at the moment.
Well, get me an answer for that one first.
Thank you.
We don't get as much uptake on our exit questionnaire as we would like, and that's factoring in to some of that work that we're going to do ongoing. I think that will give us a lot greater intelligence, because we do act on what we've got, but it's not wide enough to really give you a statistically viable picture. So that's very much focused in on where we come from. In terms of where we how we marry up, we are comparable. Ours isn't a particular outlier as such, but there's always work to be done. I think, having said that, some turnover is always good. If you don't get any turnover at all, then it tends to indicate that there's something else not quite right either. So there's a healthy level of turnover to be had.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons I asked that question is, for example, I agree completely with Councillor Dunn about apprentices. I've enjoyed reading on social media. I've seen the advertisements on TV. I watched the TV programme. and there was Northumberland County Council. I thought, this is brilliant. And it was prime TV as well. It wasn't hidden away on Deva or something like that. It might have been on Deva, I don't know. No, but for example, the reason I asked that question was, are some of the people leaving the apprentices? I don't know where they're leaving from. If it's across the board, it's across the board. And that takes me to my second question, Chairman, on page 27. One of the things as a district councillor I was particularly keen on was performance indicators. As members, we do not see them. We don't. I find that sad. On page 27, for example, you have the performance appraisal, end of year achievement. Adult Services Director at 90%, Chief Executive Director at 92.9%, and so on. In comparison to what? I don't know what it was the year before. I don't know what it was the year before. I can't equate that to anything. So, for example, I look at the lowest, Leanne, planning and local services, 76.55. So I say to myself, was that 70% the year before? Is that an improvement? Or is there a problem in that department? So what I'm actually saying, because at the very beginning you said it's your first year of doing this report, so if I could see that in future, I think that would be an improvement. But I would also make this plea. Members should get more involved in putting these tables together. It shouldn't just be left to staff, because we have to make sure those services that go out there, they are identified, and it's identified why people are leaving and what jobs are being done in the best way that can be done. So I've pinched a little bit of my own personal to satisfy that, but that's an excellent report. I enjoyed reading it. A beautiful weekend, hot weather, but I still enjoyed reading it. Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the
Okay,
time.
thank you, Councillor Wallace. And yes, I think it would be good to have, obviously, as it builds up in future years, the previous year's percentage, just so we can see if it's going up or down.
Yeah, I can provide, I
Yeah.
mean, we have that, I can absolutely
Yeah.
provide that, yeah.
Right, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent report, Leanne. I like comprehensive reports as well. You certainly seem to be driving a positive culture within the organisation, so well done to you and your staff. Couple of quick questions I was going to ask about the apprentices. My question is, where are we recruiting from? Where are we advertising? And the fact that we've only managed to achieve half the vacancies, are we going to look at where we're trying to recruit from?
Yeah, that's constantly under review, because we do a lot with schools, but I think we can do more. So I think the connection between Audrey Kingham's team and ours is much stronger than it was. So we need to just make sure that we're out in the grassroots areas where we're attracting the sort of the school leavers, if you like, but also some high calibre individuals. So it's constant review against the market conditions. I don't think we were alone in how in struggling to recruit. I think we just need to get into a position where we're ahead of the trends, and we can see them coming, and that we're the first ones there to attract the best quality candidates that we possibly can. So Janine will, no doubt you'll start to see a lot more on social media from Janine now as the chair of the National Apprenticeship Group. So it's a bit of a moving target, if you like, because we've got to, it's not just apprenticeships in the talent management, it's how those feed into making sure that we've got really strong career paths. Because in times gone by, it had been, we'll have an apprentice, it was supported wage-wise, and then they were moved out, and actually there was no career progression. So we've had to have a bit of a ground zero on that, if you like, to make sure that when we're recruiting that there is onward path, because it's not a great position to bring in that percentage. So we're much better on that.
Excellent. My second question was about the staff bank and the agency. I'm not quite sure what a staff bank is. How does that work? Is that
Internal agency is the easiest way to describe it. So we will sign people up on it as and when, almost like a casual contract. So for admin, for example, we'll have 20 or 30 people that are quite happy to pick up work on an ad hoc basis, and we then don't have to go through an agency at short term to do that, and we obviously don't incur the agency costs when we do it in-house. So that pretty much is how it works. We're in the process of widening how many people. So if we've got people that do leave and they're going on to different jobs, before they leave, we'll actually say, do you want to join our staff bank and actually do some additional hours? So it kind of addresses where we've got shortages, but a more cost-effective route than using an agency.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think we need quite a much larger bank in that than we had last year.
Yeah.
So we've got the leader.
Thank you very much. Can I thank Leanne for that very good report, and also to say how well she has picked up her new responsibilities, and very, very grateful to you for the way you've done that. Can I just return to Councillor Wallace's question, because I think it's an important one. My understanding is that all local government have a problem at the moment with recruitment and retention, and that Northumberland is no different from any other authority. I think it's really important to make that point. And secondly, in terms of the sections in which staff are leaving more frequently, am I right in thinking it's around planning? Yeah.
Councillor Dunn.
Sorry, just have one quick question, Leanne. I mean, we've mentioned sickness and that sort of thing, and I think I'm correct in saying that in that first 3 quarters of the year, the sickness was on an upward trend.
Yeah.
Is that levelling out? Are we seeing any evidence of that levelling out, or even anywhere meeting the target that we put, which I think was about 3.5% or something?
Yeah, so our standard target is 3.5. I mean, when we were in restrictions, we did an amazingly well against that in terms of we were pretty much tracking it, which is quite unheard of. I mean, it's an aspirational target, 3.5. So at the minute, we're in the middle of a peak of another wave, so we've probably seen more transmission in this wave than we have in any other. So, but against that, we are doing a pretty good job. It's not, I don't think we've necessarily seen a level off and coming down. Normally in the summer, we do, but these are, you can't predict at this point in time how it's going. So, yeah, it's steadily trickling up, but that's exactly what's happening in the community.
Sorry, Councillor Murphy, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. About where we recruit apprentices from, my husband works with an NCC apprentice who's in her 50s, and we were both a bit taken aback, but actually when I looked into it more, it's becoming more and more common. And I'm wondering about focusing on particular areas like, playgroups with mums who are thinking about going back to work and might need more flexible working, but also people who, perhaps men in heavy industry, approaching around 50 and becoming physically less able to do that, but also promoting apprenticeships as a change of career. I mean, let's face it, most of our kids will be working until they're 70 before they can retire. So there's nothing wrong with thinking about a change of career in your 30s or 40s. So maybe that kind of wider perspective. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that reskilling you're going to see a lot more of that nationally to address, because Councillor Sanderson's absolutely right. The current labour market is nothing like anybody's seen. Even those that work in recruitment have not seen a labour market like it.
Right. Thank you very much once again for that report, and thanks members for your questions. Right. So we'll move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is the debt recovery report, and Jan is on the big screen behind me. So, Jan, if you'd just like to talk us through this report.
Yes, I'll just make a few sort of introductory comments, if that's okay, Chair, and Keith is there with you in the committee room, can answer any points of detail. So what I would say is that we are clearly continuing to see the impact of both the COVID pandemic and more recently the cost of living crisis on our debt recovery position. It is a mixed picture. We still have an overhang of work in relation to things like write-offs and enforcement activity for unpaid debt due to the COVID pandemic. Because as members will be aware, we weren't actually to pursue the normal enforcement action for unpaid debt that we would have done previously or prior to the COVID pandemic. And of course, more recently, we are now seeing the impact of people struggling to pay. So write-offs are lower than they have been in previous years. We are continuing to work through the write-offs, but writing off debt is the last thing that we do after we've pursued all other recovery options. So that explains why the level of write-offs has been significantly lower in the last 2 financial years than previously. Paragraph 5 of the report, members I'm sure will have noted that the amount of debt outstanding at the 31st of March 2022 was more than double the amount at the end of the previous financial year. A large part of that was in adult social care, where again the COVID pandemic had a significant impact on us being able to deal with probate cases, an appointment of panel deputies, where we have to access customer funds. And the other thing that I know that this committee are always interested in is whether the NHS are paying their bills. And I'm sure members will have noted that the NHS continue to be late paying their bills. But the good news is that they do eventually pay. And I think Keith can provide a bit of an update on the current position. In terms of council tax collection, again, we are seeing arrears start to creep up, but the in-year collection rate up until now has actually held up quite well. So the collection rate, we set a target taking account of COVID of 96.6%, and the actual in-year collection rate was 97.4%. I think it remains to be seen whether we continue to maintain that level in the current year. But so far so good, and I think it's it's actually been a bit surprising that collection rates have held up as well as they have. But we shall see what happens next. Just one point, just to clarify, paragraph 15 of the report, that the council tax support collection rate does take account of the fact that working age customers received a hardship fund payment of £150 during 21-22, and that impacted on the collection rate. So I think we need to be a bit cautious about comparing figures from one year to the next. And there has also been an impact on the number of customers paying by direct debit, because the effect of those hardship payments has been to take a lot of people out of council tax altogether who would previously had some liability. So just a note of caution about comparing some of those year on year figures. I will stop there, Chair. I'm sure members have lots of detailed questions.
Thanks so much, Jan. So, members, do we have any questions? Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, just a comment to say that I'm very glad to see that we haven't thrown anyone in prison for not paying their council tax, which is wonderful. And I'm just wondering whether we could get rid of that as a potential outcome. People in prison surely should be people who are a danger to society and not people who can't pay their debts. I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to propose it.
John, do you want me to come in there? Yeah, sorry, Chair. For council tax, there are a number of prescribed methods of recovery that we're governed by, of which committal to prison is one that's in the legislation, and it's been there since council tax came about in 1993. It was something that councils used regularly some years ago. However, over recent years, or prior to the pandemic anyway, recent years prior to the pandemic, it became an option that was used less and less. I think it's been abolished in Scotland. It may have been abolished in Wales, I'm not sure, but the general view is that it won't be too long before the legislation is amended to remove that course of action.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. To page 66 and paragraph 49, where we're noticing that, you know, the number of universal credit, people in receipt of universal credit has gone up quite a lot. And then I go to paragraph 51, where it sort of details the average rent for a property, and those in receipt of universal credit are in arrears of £481.61, and those not in receipt are in arrears of £331.85. So then it goes on to say that those on universal credit are performing better than those that aren't. Is that right, or am I just reading that wrong?
Chair, that's something, if you would allow, if I can clarify that with our housing colleagues.
Yes, okay, that's done. I was going to say, but yeah, we'll get a written reply on that just to double check that, because you're right, it does look counterintuitive there, doesn't it?
I actually think we brought this up in the last report that we had. I think it's carried on from there, but it certainly isn't right as far as I can see in there. And it's just a bit worrying that we have this upward trend in people that are actually now on universal credit, so that's why I'm bringing the attention to it, really. Thank you.
So we'll look into that, and we can maybe email the committee members with the correct version. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. Jan, just a general question, really. When we set our budget, do we make any allowance for debt, or do we assume 100% collection rate in the likes of council tax?
No, we do make an assumption about the collection rate. We are required to do that. That's part of the calculations, the council tax calculations that are laid before council in February as part of the budget report. But we consistently outperform those collection rates. So we normally have a collection fund surplus at the end of the year, and that money, that collection fund surplus is then shared with between the council and the preceptors, and we take account of any surplus or any deficit on the collection fund when we're setting the council tax for the next financial year. I do think it's going to be an area that we'll have to look at more closely in constructing the budget for the 23-24 cycle, and similar issue in relation to business rates collection, although that has less of a direct impact on the council because business rates, as members will know, are pooled nationally. But as I said, you know, I think we will have to monitor the position with the in-year collection rate, and then take a view on that when we set the budget in February.
Okay, thanks very much. Do you have any more questions on that report? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Jan and your team, for that. Then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Green Homes Grant. Lead, would like to introduce this. Okay.
Thank you very much. This is a fairly straightforward report, members, which I'll ask officers to outline in more detail. But essentially, there is a significant demand for this work to be carried out in Northumberland. There is good funding available from government to do it, and we have been very active in undergoing the work. However, we have found that the partner that we worked with has not necessarily been absolutely the right partner. So I'm very pleased to say that we will be working between the housing and the climate change team to deliver this in future. I always prefer it when we could do jobs in-house if we can do them. And I find that we normally do them better than using outside contractors. So I'm sure this will work to continue this really important work that is in front of us.
Thank you for the leader. Any introduction you'd like to make? Yeah, that's...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Yes, as Councillor Sanderson states, this is really an update on the progress of this scheme. There's significant funding coming out of government towards improving energy efficiency in homes, and we're aware that that's only going to increase in the coming years. So this report tells members kind of exactly where that's been directed across the course of the last year or so, where we've been able to go into homes and improve energy efficiencies, and then what the process will look like going forward. And there is quite a change to our delivery, so I'll let Mark explain that in more detail in a moment. I guess just to say, in light of the cost of living crisis and energy crisis that we're kind of experiencing now, this work is more important than ever. So we are committed to delivering this to the best of our ability, despite the kind of challenges that we face from supply chain and from the kind of funding restrictions. But I'll hand over to Mark to give you some proper detail.
Thank you very much. So as been outlined already, we've been delivering this programme for a little over a year, utilising what I would describe as a turnkey model. So we had a partner that was delivering an end-to-end style service from sort of first touch point with residents right the way through to final installation. And as the report details, we've had a number of kind of issues with that delivery model. A distinct kind of lack of control over the funding and the way that it's being utilised and distributed. So as we've mentioned, we're looking to in-house that model, and that process has started and commenced now. So we've gone through a process to recruit a retrofit team into our housing department. So we've gone out to recruit 5 roles. 3 have been successfully recruited and appointed, and those people are now in post, going through induction and training, and are due to kind of start undertaking those roles in the near term. So I think what's been experienced, and probably worth saying, is there's been a bit of a transition period from the turnkey option, which ended effectively kind of 1st of April, through to where we are at the moment, where we've recruited the team and now we're starting that delivery process utilising a number of regional supply chain operators. As Nick outlined, supply chain's been a bit of a difficulty for us. It's goes somewhat without saying that the government, having put quite so much money into this really important agenda, is driving a shift in the supply chain, but the funding is coming kind of annually. So in terms of that funding coming in, us appointing contractors, they're not necessarily getting up to speed in terms of increasing those numbers of roles, there are those apprenticeships, and increasing those delivery numbers. So we are noticing that supply chain has reached a little bit of capacity. It's starting to slow down a little bit in terms of delivery. So we're waiting for that to catch up a little bit, which may affect kind of some future delivery, but we're working very closely with our procurement colleagues to find successful routes to appoint, wherever possible, local or regional contractors to deliver these projects. As can be seen in the report, we've in-house the way that we're now interacting with residents. So we've done some live events in a number of locations across the county, as well as opening up a website where people can register. We appreciate that levels of fuel poverty and digital poverty probably overlap fairly strongly, so we're also utilising our call centre to take calls from residents who don't have digital access as well. And there's a couple of infographics in terms of kind of the distribution of those referrals that are coming in, which are county-wide, so across all wards. In terms of kind of the total amounts of funding that we've brought in £11 million to date, and as I said, we're working through the delivery of that over the next 12 months. At the current moment, we've got until the end of March to deliver some of those programmes. Probably worth saying that the programmes work across both private sector homes as well as social housing, and we're working with a couple of our large registered provider partners in Carbon and Benicia Homes to deliver some further programmes within their homes, as well as our own in-council housing stock. I think just as a final note, as Nick's outlined, we're expecting further funding coming out. So there is an announcement that there'll be more funding for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, we believe, over the summer. So probably within the next couple of months that'll go out, and the council fully expects to try and bid for more resource to deliver further programmes of work under that funding stream. And there's been announcements from central government that they're releasing further funding to support both homes that are on the gas grid as well as homes that are off the gas grid. So there's two very slightly different funding support mechanisms for those two different types of homes. And the climate change team, working with our housing department, is keen to continue the programme of work beyond our current end date and apply for those funds.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Oliver?
Thank you. That was fascinating. Can I just I've got sort of three very brief questions. The first one is around the EON applications and delivery. So 345 applications, which resulted in 137 delivery. I'm just interested in the sort of key reasons for the difference. Second question is around you've got around about £13 million to spend overall, including sort of admin costs and stuff. In terms of the level of demand that you've got at the moment from private and public sector housing, is that kind of enough to use up all of that money? And then the third question is around new housing. I'm aware of social housing that's being built in my neck of the woods that isn't being built with renewable energy sort of built in. It's cheaper and easier to build, to do it at initial build rather than retrofit. So is there anything else we can do to encourage that?
Yeah, I mean, taking those in order. So the EON question, we're working both across, it's probably worth saying, social as well as private housing. We delivered a proportion of the housing. I think the area that we've struggled in was probably twofold. Primarily, solar was difficult in terms of delivery. I think there's some serious supply chain constraints in the market. The changing way that it's been funded over the last sort of 10 years or so has caused a large number of businesses to go out of business, and then we're now injecting quite a lot of capital into a market that doesn't have that supply chain established yet. So the solar delivery was quite slow, and we were due to install quite a number on our own social housing, but the price point that we got from our supplier made it uneconomical given the levels of support that we were needed to put in. There was a match fund for our own social housing, and it wasn't proving value for money, so we elected not to go forward with those. There was about 120 homes that didn't get delivered for that purpose. Refresh my memory, Councillor Oliver. Question two.
Have you got enough applications to use up the money that's been allocated so far?
In terms of the numbers that we've got, I think we've got about 50% from the last time I had a look at the numbers. So in terms of where we're at in the programme, the delivery, we've got sufficient to deliver, I think, two two of the funding streams that we've got. The social housing ones, we've got more than enough social housing properties to be delivered. And then we are continuing our marketing campaigns and having a look at effectively referrals over time. So there's been quite a number of peaks as we've done things. I think particularly there was a large push on newspaper adverts, which drove quite a significant increase in our week-by-week referrals. So I think strategically placing those over time, and I think what we're likely to experience is two kind of major feedbacks. One's going to be, as delivery starts happening in an area, neighbours and local people are going to start to see that delivery, and they're going to start asking questions. How did you get X? Can we be involved in that? And the answer is quite categorically yes. The other is, as we move out of the warmer weather and towards colder weather, I think it's going to crop into the forefront of people's minds. As it's been reported nationally, we're expecting more energy price hikes in October. And I think that's going to drive a serious amount of interest into the programme come that time of year. It goes without saying that kind of the earlier we can get residents to apply, the more likelihood we have to deliver within the time frame. So we're keen to get people into the process as early as possible. But I think those two factors are going to start to drive some interest in the programme in the near term.
Could I just add to that?
Of course.
Yeah. We've really benefited from member involvement in pushing out these programmes and in identifying residents who would be eligible. So we'd really be grateful to kind of continue that. So if you and your colleagues know of residents who would benefit from this, then please do flag up the programme to them. I can take question 3 as well, Councillor Oliver, around the quality of new builds, and you're absolutely right. It makes much more sense to build homes with renewable technology and a high energy efficiency standard than it does to have to go back and retrofit them. Unfortunately, they're two different things, and national building regs are the minimum standard by which house builders have to adhere. But we are working closely with colleagues in planning to develop something called a supplementary planning document to append to the local plan, which will encourage new builds to use as much of this technology as they can, and will kind of do everything that we can as a council and as a planning authority to encourage and to push that. So we are looking at it really closely and yeah, doing what we can.
Councillor Dunn next. That's all.
Ask what the situation was currently with private landlord properties, because am I right in that they don't get the full 100% grant? Have we had many applications from that area, or is that really? I know when we had the event within my ward, that was one of the questions from a lady. How do I get my landlord to apply for this? Because she did not believe in any which way or form they were going to do it to improve her property. And I'm just wondering if there's been an uptake on this from private landlords.
Yeah, to be honest, it's quite difficult. So within the process, as you rightly outline, landlords have to make a contribution, which is approximately a third. So in terms of the way in which the programme runs, we've struggled to get a little bit of that interest from private landlords in the upfront, and from experience when private landlords are in the process, there is often a bit of a discrepancy between at the point where we want to do the delivery and the point where they want to hand over their contribution for it. So they can obviously, ideally from a delivery point of view, we'd like the cash up front so that we're not delivering into a property and then trying to collect in arrears. That can generate some difficulties with the programme delivery. It probably is also worth stating that this is a national problem. It's not one that just our council is tackling. Across the UK, we sit on a number of panels where central government report on kind of these programmes and ask local authorities for learning, and this is a common issue that no one's got a simple or a successful kind of solution to, unfortunately.
Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Chair. Chairman, this is a scheme that's got to be welcomed, it really has. As a ward councillor who has something like 87% Band A, Band B properties, lots of social housing, homes that were built for former railway workers, former coal miners. You wonder where the data for high level of eligible residents comes from. It's there. You just got to drive around. You can see it in my ward. That would be my question, where you get your data from. But I'd like to take this opportunity on something Councillor Oliver raised. One of the questions members ask constantly is, what's an affordable home? My question is, what home is affordable with the cost of living crisis, with the energy costs? Your home is probably the most expensive thing you'll ever spend your money on, but it needs to be affordable, that you can afford to live in there. We have an organisation amongst us called Advanced Northumberland. They build quality homes. And we need to say to them, build those homes we're describing. Those homes that are affordable to people to live in. That meets the targets to get towards net zero as the years go on. Then we can turn around to Bellway and Persimmon and anybody else that builds homes and says, we do it, you do it. That's what to say to your planning department. We're doing it, now follow. And residents, buyers will want that to happen. That's what I would suggest to you, but that's my suggestion. In the meanwhile, I'll show you how to get to Camas and Sleepburn Ward if you're looking for eligible homes. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks. I think there might be a question there somewhere. We've got Advance. What would like to confirm that our houses, Advance's houses, are suitably built properly?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very happy to come back, and the answer is yes. We stand ready, willing, and able to help in what is going to be the major problem of our times, I think. There's a point just to raise, and I think you've put your finger on it as well, Councillor Wallace, is in terms of some of the houses we built, the majority are sort of private sale into the market. We've got to be able to compete hand in glove against Bellway, otherwise they're going to be unaffordable and uncompetitive. But very happy to work with the guys here and hopefully come up with a solution.
Well, that's fortuitous, they're here anyway. Right, you want to add to? Well, I think before we go to Councillor, you want to add to what Councillor Wallace said?
It was just on the data point in terms of where we picked up our data from. So the answer is probably a couple of places. So we've been working with North of Tyne, who undertook a piece of work to appoint the Energy Savings Trust, who utilise a database of national homes whereby they cut various things from energy performance certificates and a number of different data sets to produce an understanding of what the levels of eligibility are within any particular geography down to kind of a postcode level. So we've been using that information as well as some of our own internal data and statistics through our business intelligence department to gain the widest understanding. In terms of kind of clarification for this particular scheme, homes have to have an energy performance certificate of D or below, which for any newer built property tends to exclude them, and also properties who have already had energy efficiency measures in the past through the various different schemes that have been delivered often are above that rating at this stage, and they also need to have a household income of below £30,000.
Councillor Murphy?
Thank you. So regardless of heating systems, my interest, my passion in this area is insulation. And I raised last week at a meeting at full council about the actual climate heating crisis and how that's going to impact on elderly people. The impact it's going to have on increased deaths and so on. And we're in the middle of a heat wave now. It's going to get worse. Across Europe, they're dying in their tens of thousands. Am I right in saying that excellent insulation not only keeps houses warm in the winter, but it keeps them cool in the summer? That really good quality insulation is actually one of the best and most effective ways of keeping a house cool in extreme weather. And that whilst I believe that as a society we're gearing up for extremes of weather in the winter, I don't think we're yet anywhere near looking at how we keep people cooler in the summer. And I'm just, again, banging the drum for insulation as being the most important factor over and above any kinds of heating systems we might come up with. I just wonder what your views are on that.
Yes, you're right. So in terms of kind of insulated homes, loft insulation, keeps heat above that insulation layer as it kind of hits off the roof, and same in terms of kind of walls and cavities, etc. The new guidance around the programme that we're delivering is that it should be a fabric first approach. I think one of the learning points we took from the turnkey provider that we had was that wasn't necessarily what was being delivered in our kind of first round of this particular programme. So having in-house that, we've now in-house the surveying part of the role, and the surveyor, as they go out, their first job and as they kind of run through the process, is to establish the fabric of the property and to understand those fabric upgrades to do exactly what you've just said, improve the thermal efficiency in the winter as well as keeping properties cool and manageable in the summer as well.
Councillor
Back to the private rental.
Press the back to bin. It's the
That one?
It's right now because you press the white hand one when you want to speak. It's right on now.
Okay, thank you. Just want to come back to the private rental bit again, and it really worries me that that sector won't be taken as much up in this scheme, because it's a good scheme and it could really improve things in that area. So it's just to raise awareness really that the most vulnerable that are stuck in those sort of properties, the private rental properties, that aren't going to take advantage of this. We just need to be looking at some way to make this a bit more or not even accessible, because it is accessible, but we need to be looking at ways to bring improvement into that section. Otherwise, we're just going to have a mass of people who are stuck in those properties with, and it's just going downhill for them all the time. So I really worry about that sector.
Yes, it's a very good point. Obviously, the scheme is open to private landlords, but it's going to cost them a bit of money to do it. But I think the key is ways to sell the scheme to them, because of course the money they spend is going to add to the value of their properties. So I think that's the message we've got to get out to them, that actually we are subsidising them improving their properties and the values of their properties, make it more attractive to landlords.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's probably worth saying, I think one of the other areas we've been struggling with, or nationally has been a bit of a struggle, is in terms of once those improvements are made in a property, one of the things we want to try and avoid is any increases in rent. So as that property improves, in theory they've got a better asset, and it's again another area that no council and central government haven't come up with a solution to ensuring that those rents remain at the kind of pre-intervention rate, which is really important given the cost of living crisis.
So isn't there a way of putting that into the contract that we have with them? To say, if you access this funding, you can't increase rent for 12 months or whatever it is.
I think it's an area we'll have to have a look at. Certainly haven't got a shelf-ready solution to that, but something we can potentially take away.
You'd like to come in now? Yeah?
Just to give you some comfort on that point, because I think it's an important point. We've got a climate change steering group this week, and we will discuss this then.
Right. Any other members on that report? No, thank you very much. That was very, very useful. Right, moving on. Next on the agenda, we have work programme for it to be noted. It's 186. And then, nothing on that. Right, we have urgent business. Now, I apologise to members for the late time we actually received this. I have raised it, and we are hopeful that in future we'll get reports like this a bit more time to look at before the meeting. But it is an important report. Oh, sorry, Councillor Murphy. Oh, so you wanted to...
Could I request that I stay but don't participate? Is that okay?
It's a matter for yourself. No, this is still open session. This is the urgent item of business. What this is it's a report that's going to Cabinet tomorrow, and it's about Advanced Northumberland. The purpose of the report is basically for Cabinet to agree that Advance adopt new Articles of Association, 2, they approve a financial delegation policy, and 3, they approve a role profile for the shareholder representative. So that's properly managed by the council at this end. So it's not about the internal management of Advance as much as its relationship with the council and how the council interacts with it. So I think if I could ask Jan just to give us an introduction, if you're still there.
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Yep.
Thank you. Yes, so as you've outlined, the articles of Advanced Northumberland have been redrafted to address a relatively small number of issues that have been identified and to provide greater clarity, in particular, about those matters which require reserved approval by the council's shareholder representative. So the report asks Cabinet to approve those revised articles. I should stress that there is other work which is ongoing at the moment, both in relation to a strategic review of Advanced Northumberland and also consideration of issues that around the relationship that the council has with its wholly owned subsidiaries, of which clearly Advanced Northumberland is one, arising from the Max Calla review. So there is further work that's being undertaken, and in due course that will in all likelihood result in a further revision of the articles, but Cabinet are being asked to approve the current draft so that we can make some progress while that wider debate about the governance of wholly owned companies is taking place, and the future sort of strategic direction for Advanced Northumberland. The report also takes the opportunity to set out clearly the role of the shareholder representative in the form of a job description, and that was one of the specific issues of concern that was highlighted by Max Calla. So we're looking to make some progress on a pragmatic basis to ensure, a smoother day-to-day sort of relationship between the council and Advanced Northumberland, while we turn our minds to those broader issues. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction, Chair. But I'm happy to take questions, and clearly you have Robin Earl there as well, can give a company perspective.
Okay, well, I'll start off with my own question. Just on the Appendix G, on the role of the controlling shareholder representative, it's got the duties which are all set out. Now, item 3 says to attend and play an active role at board meetings of the company. Now, I'm just a little concerned about that, because obviously one of the criticisms of the Calla report was that the shareholder representative appeared to be acting as basically a shadow director and trying to micromanage the company, which isn't the role of the shareholder. I just wanted if you to expand on that, and is that appropriate? Attending board meetings is one thing, but an active role, is that going to be an issue with the shareholder representative basically acting as a quasi-shadow director?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good point, Chair. It's really important that the shareholder representative doesn't act in a manner that could be seen as acting as a shadow board member. But the shareholder representative, I think, can legitimately represent the views of the council as shareholder at board meetings, while also respecting, the fact that it is for board members to make decisions. It's a fairly nuanced issue. I think this is more about the manner in which the shareholder representative exercises that role, doing that in a constructive way, but without influencing, board decisions in an inappropriate way. It can work perfectly well, but I think everybody needs to be mindful at those board meetings about which particular hat they're wearing, and to sort of respect those boundaries. And in practice, sometimes that can be difficult, but on balance, I think it's probably beneficial for the shareholder representative to be present at board meetings, and where appropriate to express a shareholder view to inform the decisions of the board, and that's why that particular provision was written in. But Robin may have a different view from a company perspective.
Robin, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jan. No, I fully support what Jan has said. I think Jan, in the role of interim shareholder representative, currently attends our board meetings, and her contributions I would describe as utterly constructive and pragmatic. The directors of the company are legally responsible for that company, and they have a duty to act in the best interests of that company. However, they could and maybe should reflect the desire of their shareholders when making that decision. So being informed by the shareholder is not the same as the shareholder making directors' decisions. So as Jan's right, as long as it's exercised properly and sensibly, this is a positive thing, and it does allow smoother, boundary-free working between the two organisations.
Just on that, I mean, maybe the committee may not agree, but I think my personal view is a sensible addition to that clause would be to attend and play an active board meetings of the company whilst recognising that decisions of the board need to be made by the board, or something like that, just to clarify, because it's all about the role of the shareholder representative going forward. And you're right, it's important that they're there and they're involved, and active I think is a good word, but an active role at a board meeting to me implies that you're a member of the board and you're making a decision. So I think just some nuance there to recognise what has been said, I think might be a good addition. If members agree with that? Yeah. So we put that as a recommendation? Yeah. Okay, Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think it's really good to see Robin here, and it's good to see senior council officers working so well with the directors of Advance, and that hasn't always been the case. I think I welcome the clarification of the role of the shareholder representative. It has previously been a bit of a game of musical chairs, and I don't think that role has been carried out as well as it could have been. So this is very welcome. I've got sort of three questions. First of all, we did have mechanisms in place, and they weren't perfect by any means, but they were overridden. And this is an issue I've raised elsewhere. But can I just ask, how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again? Because whatever processes and mechanisms you put in place, if somebody in a senior position deliberately overrides them, then they're worthless. I would just also ask, are many of the reserved matters contained in these documents different to those that were in the original shareholder agreements, or the most recent version of the shareholder agreements? And then last year, there was, I think probably in January or February last year, there was a bit of a power grab when the structure of the shareholder group was significantly changed, and member involvement was precluded. What are the plans going forward with the shareholder group, and will we see member involvement again? Thank you.
Okay, there's a few questions there. I'll get Jan first.
Yeah, so Councillor Oliver, you're quite right that there is always the danger of management override, whatever processes and procedures the council puts in place. I think, you know, as much as anything else, the answer to that is about ensuring that, you know, there is appropriate member scrutiny. And one of the changes that I think we would all like to see going forwards is greater transparency about the way in which the shareholder representative role is being discharged, and more consultation with the executive, and more direction from members about how they would wish to see that role being discharged. The reserve matters, I don't think this is very different. I think it's more about bringing clarity, and also I think the financial scheme of delegation, which is being proposed, does provide greater clarity about how significant transactions need to be before they require shareholder approval. That's a pragmatic proposal which is designed to ensure that the system doesn't get clogged up with requests for approval of very minor matters. So we have introduced what we think are some sensible financial thresholds, and matters below those thresholds will not require shareholder approval going forwards. On the final point about the membership of the Shareholder Assurance Group, I do think this is part of the wider debate that needs to take place around governance of wholly owned companies in the wake of the Max Caller review. I think there's a number of options for member involvement in that assurance process. It is an executive matter, and I think it is appropriate for the relevant members of the executive, to have greater involvement in these issues. But we do need to be really careful about managing conflicts of interest. So I think that requires a bit more sort of considered discussion. And as I've said in my introductory remarks, I think we now need to start that conversation and then consider what further changes we might need to make to the arrangements going forwards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any other? Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. We had 30 minutes to read the Caller report. We've had 5 minutes to read this thing. Hundreds of pages by a look at it. But shareholders reserve power, John. The controlling shareholder may, by special resolution, direct the directors to take or refrain from taking specified action. What would be the special resolution? Would that be a full council special resolution, or would that be the other directors of the company special resolution?
No, that is a special resolution issued by the shareholder representative. So it's not cabinet or council. But I go back to the point that I previously made about those sorts of powers being exercised in consultation with relevant members of the executive, and being done in a more transparent manner. But the shareholder representative acts independently under delegated authority, and I think the issue is about the manner in which those delegated powers are exercised, rather than the delegation itself. That will be my personal view.
Well, just carrying on from there, we've got shareholders' reserve power. The holding company may, by special resolution, direct the directors to take or refrain from taking specified action. What's the holding company in this case then?
That is Advanced Northumberland Limited, which is the the holding company for the various subsidiaries. So in other words, the Advanced board can direct its subsidiaries to do something or to refrain from doing something.
So it's direct the directors to take.
Yeah. This is some clarity on company law. Basically, the directors manage the company on behalf of the owner. The owner is the shareholder. In a normal company, owned by shareholders, they could pass a special resolution to tell directors at a shareholder meeting what they want to do. Obviously, in this situation, there's one shareholder, the county council itself. So the shareholder representative is basically the shareholders, and will make that can make that direction legally.
What I'm really asking, do we have a holding company? An overall holding company for all these other companies?
Yeah, I think Robin can answer that.
Yeah, just, I mean, Advanced Northumberland is a group of 5 companies, and Advanced Northumberland Limited is the holding company for that group. We don't have an upward holding company. All of our shares are owned by Northumberland County Council. So there isn't a holding company above Advanced Northumberland, but Advanced Northumberland itself is a holding company of its operational subsidiaries. Does that answer the question?
It doesn't. I'm still not sure about this. It just, from what I've heard, it's muddying the water even more, as far as I'm concerned. I just can't understand it. The holding company may, by special resolution, direct the directors to take, or refrain from taking.
The directors of the holding. Just to give you, try to explain it. Basically, Advanced Northumberland Limited is a company owned by the county council. It has 5 or 4 subsidiary companies. Ascent Homes and all the other ones. They are owned by Advanced Northumberland. So the board of Advance can give directions to the boards of their subsidiary companies.
For the subsidiary companies.
Yeah.
That's the bit where it doesn't say. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. Chair, where we are today with Advance, they've morphed from being a number of companies. Back in 2008, I was chairman of Wansbeck District Council, and a paper was put in front of me as I was chairing the meeting, as Councillor Robinson's just alluded to. We had 4 or 5 minutes. Our company was called Wansbeck Life. We then had 2 years minimum bad press of decisions being made by that council that day on what they thought was best for the community. I'm not saying this isn't bad, I'm not saying it's good. What I am saying is, Chair, on that memory, I will be abstaining from this forward. This is wrong to put this in. I'm confused with the questions that's being asked. I'm even more confused with the answers. I have no understanding of it whatsoever. I can only abstain, Chair. And it may be the best thing since sliced bread, I don't know.
Well, we are not a decision-making body. This is a Cabinet report that will be agreed by Cabinet tomorrow, or not. But members of this committee can make recommendations to Cabinet to consider. If you've got no recommendations to make, that's absolutely fine, Councillor. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you. I've got to agree with Alex and Malcolm. I just don't think we're given long enough to read this. This is a massive pack, which, like Alex, I confess, I don't particularly understand. So I don't know how we could put any comments on anything going to Cabinet, because, I mean, I welcome the role profile, that's one thing. But the other one, the adopt new articles of association of the company, I can't comment on it because I don't know what the other articles were. If there'd even been some sort of highlighted bits in here to sort of bring your attention to the bits that have been revised, although I think Jan said there wasn't very much, so that wouldn't have been, took a lot of highlighting pen. But then it was something to compare or think what had been changed. But I don't see how we can comment on that going forward, because we simply have not had time to digest it or understand it.
Chair, would it help if I were to give the committee a brief summary of the changes from the previous set of articles?
Yes, that would help. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So the first change that has been made is to the quorum. So previously, there was a minimum of 2 required for a quorum for advanced board meetings. That has now been amended to 3 or 50% of appointed directors. So in reality, that will be 5 directors on current board appointments because there are 9. And within that, there is a further requirement that at least 1 must be a councillor and 2 must not be councillors. So it can either be 2 officer directors or 1 officer and 1 independent. The second change that has been made is to introduce a new concept of relevant agreements. So we have an operating agreement, but this is this allows future agreements between the county, council and advance to become part of the council's governance, but without having to change the articles each time either a new agreement is introduced or amendments are made. The articles clearly are filed at Companies House, and every time we have to change the articles, we have to resubmit them at Companies House. So to introduce a degree of flexibility, we've introduced this concept of relevant agreements, and the financial scheme of delegation is an example of one of those agreements. We have also introduced, as I touched on previously in definitions, this concept of a financial threshold, which allows delegation levels to be set in the financial scheme of delegation, below which the shareholder will not need to be involved and will not be required to give consent. And the shareholder can set that threshold in the financial delegation policy, the annual business plan, etc., and just notify the company, again, without having to amend the articles. And that is a pragmatic measure which ensures that we're not going backwards and forwards on a daily basis, giving consent to transactions which are just part of the ordinary sort of business as usual. So that's the third change. The articles relating to committees, so we're talking here about Articles 9 and 10, have been redrafted so that it's clear that their authority flows from the main Advanced Northumberland Board, but must satisfy the shareholders' needs. So the current set needed a special resolution, for example, from the shareholder representative to enable an audit committee to be established, which is a bit of a nonsense in all honesty. Although, interestingly, the articles did allow the board to establish a remuneration committee. So we've done some tidying up there to make sure that those provisions are more consistent, they're more logical, and makes provision for further committees to be set up by the board or upon my request as the shareholder representative without the need for a special resolution. And then the final change is a new requirement for the shareholder representative to be entitled to attend and speak at board meetings, Article 15.4, which I think is the one that the chair touched on. That's already current practice, but we've now enshrined that in the articles themselves, as well as enshrining the right of the shareholder representative to call a board meeting and to propose board resolutions, although only directors would be able to vote on those board resolutions. So those are the changes to the body of the articles. The Schedule 1 sets out reserved matters. Schedule 1 is a key part of the articles and ensures, a pretty high degree of control over the company's activities by the shareholder. And again, in discussion with the advanced board, and advance officers, we've tried to strike a pragmatic balance between ensuring that the shareholder, you know, is comfortable with the level of control, but that does not interfere unduly, both with the remit of the advance directors themselves to act in the interests of the company, but also, doesn't interrupt sort of the normal flow of business. And that is something which the clarification of what is and what isn't a reserve matter is long overdue. There's been a huge amount of toing and froing on that in the past year since the time that I joined the county council. So there is a need to ensure that areas of potential risk that require oversight by the shareholder remain fundamentally within the shareholder's remit, but as I say, without unduly undermining the ability of the board to take decisions that are necessary and in the interests of the company itself. So I hope that's helpful to the committee, Chair, in
Yes.
directing attention to the key changes.
Yes, I think that's very helpful. That does give us a good canter through the major changes, which to me all seem very sensible. I've got nothing I would recommend to Cabinet to change in those. No one, Councillor Robertson?
Chair, I understand what you're saying. I think we should be saying to Cabinet that, we're not company director lawyers, we're not...
If yourself?
The more common or garden members of this committee aren't, then. We certainly can't go through this in 10 minutes with a fine-tooth comb. If we do make a recommendation, I think it's, we need someone to look at it, possibly, on our behalf. An independent person to look at it on our behalf. If it had been anything else, that would be what I would be recommending, because I don't see how we can... I understand what Jan's saying, and thanks very much for the clarity, but there still might be something in there which, we want to object to, or want to highlight, or want a reasonable explanation about, and we haven't had time to find it. So that's what I'd be saying to Cabinet.
So formulate that. So our recommendation is that, obviously, due to the lack of time we've had to look at the paper prior to it going to Cabinet, that if Cabinet do decide to proceed with it, that we do potentially, after the new changes are bedded in, that we do some post-scrutiny on it. That would be a sensible. Are we happy to agree to that? Councillor Benham?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I can understand what Malcolm's saying, and there are reasons behind us getting this report late. But I think that the changes that Jan's just highlighted, because there have been many problems with Advance, but I think these changes alone, and I'm very happy for this to come back again for us to have a look at, depending on what Cabinet say. But these changes alone will help Advance progress with many projects, not be held up like they have been, and I think it makes it more transparent. So on the highlighted points that Jan's made, I'm very happy to recommend those to Cabinet, but I'm also happy for it to come back again at a later stage.
So just how we formulated, I was just sort of saying, so other than the recommendation to change on the role of shareholder representative in Appendix G, which we had earlier, so put that in, the committee do not see any issues with the information provided, with the caveat that it has been provided late and there hasn't been time for a deep dive by the committee into the detail. With that in mind, we would request that a report comes back to this committee 6 months' time, once these changes are bedded in, to see whether or not the new structure is fit for purpose, or we're happy with it. Is that something we are happy to agree, members? Yeah, agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Right, now I'm going to go on to make a move that we exclude the press and public under section 100A, etc. We all agreed? Agreed, okay, cut the feed.